Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Deston Rogers. Deston has spent over 4 decades mastering the art of connection. A veteran of radio broadcasting, law enforcement, and international police advising, his career has been defined by his voice and his commitment to serving others. But his most profound message wasn't forged in a broadcast booth or a briefing room. It was born in the fire of unimaginable personal tragedy. After enduring the devastating loss of 2 of his sons, 34 years apart, and their mother, Deston faced distinct seasons of profound, suffocating grief that challenged everything he knew. In his darkest moments, he leaned entirely into his Christian faith, trusting that God already had a purposeful path laid out and will not let us be defeated. Bolstered by the unwavering support of family and friends, he made the active choice to keep fighting the good fight, stepping fully into a lifestyle of radical resilience. Today, that choice has become his calling. Deston is an international best-selling contributing author to the book Miracles Are Normal and the founder and host of the Eagle Freedom Presents podcast. Through his platform, he champions the Rise, Inspire, Overcome movement, using his voice in his deeply personal journey through pain to guide and inspire others, navigating their own darkest valleys. His favorite Bible verses from 2 Timothy 4:7, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. And with that, Deston, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It's a pleasure having you on the program today.
Dave, thank you very much. I've been looking forward to jumping on this with you and sharing a story with your audience. And I just welcome the opportunity to do this. It's been great.
Well, and I think we have to throw a shout out to Anastasia Lipsky. Anastasia found you on LinkedIn, had a conversation with you, and immediately introduced the two of us, thinking that we could probably collaborate on a pretty impactful podcast episode. And once we learned each other's stories, because there's a lot of alignment for both of us in terms of child loss, we decided, this is something that we needed to do. So I'm glad that we've come here in this moment to talk about your journey and everything else in between.
Yeah, and it's been a great connection thanks to Anna. You know, it's amazing. It's really the power of one connection that can bring people together for universal messages like ours, you know, being able to speak about this, but it wouldn't happen had that one connection not been there. And Anna, thank you very much for that connection, because thanks to you, we're here to do this.
Yeah, and Anastasia is great. She's referred me many, many good guest contributors, and she's very good at what she does as a podcast agent. She's very passionate about her work, and she takes pains to vet her clients and vet podcast hosts for the appropriate matches. So she does her work with a lot of integrity and a lot of class.
Yes, I agree with you.
So, Deston, my first question for you is elaborate a little bit more on the major experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Well, I have to go back as far as life experiences. I have to go back to my parents. That's where everything started. My parents were very supportive of anything me and my brother's done. There's 4 of us. I'm the second of the 4 kids. They taught us a lot about perseverance, about respecting others, about doing the right thing, getting up every day and working hard. So I really starts there. But beyond my parents, as you mentioned, I spent 40 years in radio broadcasting. And that came about simply because a connection with my dad, who my parents used to own an antique shop, and they used to have to go in and do advertising at a radio station. And I went with my dad one day, and I saw this thing. They're like, wow, this is just amazing. All these people, they're talking, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like me. And that was years before he actually got into radio. But years later, I was able to sit down with the local owner of the station where I was living in California. And I was fortunate that he became my mentor in radio because he invited me in and he says, anytime you want to come down, you're more than welcome to. And it was that opportunity, he didn't have to do that, but it was just an opportunity for him to open up the door and say, here's a young teenage guy, you want to learn, I'll teach you the skills. And he really became my mentor and taught me so much, not just about radio and communicating and how to talk to people, but life stories too. I mean, how to deal with people in life and what to expect and not to expect like that. His name is John Young. That's his name. And he taught me a lot about radio. And of course, I know we're going to talk into it, but also life experiences in losing my sons. That was obviously the big thing, and losing their mom in the process of all of this. And so those are some key things that really shaped me. I was never brought up in a religious family. My father was Catholic, but I think I remember going to church twice with him. So that was never a big thing, which I'm glad, because that allowed me to form my own opinion on religion and how I would foster my relationship with God.
And I think that that's important. I mean, just as an aside, I went to a one-room Catholic schoolhouse. So that's dating me a little bit, Dustin. I went to church every morning. That was required before we went to class. And then I eventually got sick of having the dogma of Catholicism kind of rammed down my throat every day. And then when I was 16, 17, I walked away when I had a choice. And today I still believe in God. I believe in a higher power. I forge my relationship with God very differently. It isn't dogmatic, it's more interfaith. And I think as parents, it's important to give our children kind of that choice to say, how do you want to forge your relationship with the higher power, with God? Do you want to do it through dogma? Do you want to do it non-dogmatically? How do you want to do that? I think that type of empowerment is key, because I think if many individuals feel like things have been force fed to them, they're going to eventually just, when they have an opportunity to make a choice, when they become adulthood or close to it, they're going to walk away.
I agree. I mean, everybody's different, but for me, I never push it on my kids, if that's something they want to do, then I let them discover that on their own. And I think it's important for them to discover what works for them and what fits their life and where they are and what they want to do with their life. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think good mentors understand that. They plant seeds and then they allow those seeds to germinate. So, um,
Right.
tell our audience about your two sons, Cody and Dakota, and your wife, Jodi. Am I correct? That was her
Yeah.
name?
So we were never married, so she was never my wife. But so I'll go back. Cody was born in March 1988. And Jody and I had gotten together before that, obviously. And we had a good relationship. We were young. We were young. Oh, we're just getting started in life. And here comes Cody was born. And he was just amazing. I remember walking into the hospital when he was born and just looking down at this beautiful creation that God gave us. I don't want to say just me, because he gave us this beautiful creation. And it was just he was just a joy in my life. And watching him grow he was always happy and always had a smile on his face. Always getting the things like kids do. So yeah, Cody was he was my first child, and he was just such a blessing. And again, life happens as it does, and we drifted apart, his mother and I. But in the process of drifting apart, she had become pregnant again. She had had another baby, and that was Dakota, and he was born in October of 1989. It was kind of a weird situation because I had recently been married. I'd gotten married, and she had a child, and it wasn't our child, but I ended up adopting him. So I was married, and then on October 25th of 1990, that's when my whole life changed. And I remember getting this phone call, and life has a way of, when traumatic things happen, of placing a timestamp in your brain. And that timestamp can be recalled faster than any computer because it just happens so fast. And so I remember getting this phone call. It was one of my coworkers, and he says, "Hey, I just got off the phone with Jodi's mom. Something about an accident. You're supposed to call down to this hospital." And I'm trying to process this information. So I called down to the hospital and I talked to the CHP officer and told her who I was. And I said, "There's something about an accident." She says, "Yes." She goes, "I'm sorry to tell you." She says, "Your son has been killed in a car accident." How do you process that information? Right? How do you just get this information? All of a sudden you're 1 minute you're happy because, all life's going great. And in that moment, everything changes. And so, of course, my next question was, well, how's Jodi? But then she said, well, Jodi was also killed in the car accident. And so what had happened was my son, Cody, had gotten out of his car seat. And so Jodi had taken her seatbelt off to turn around to put him back in his car seat. In the process, the driver of the vehicle, who I believe was her fiance, was distracted looking back at what was going on. Well, when he turned back around, he had allowed the vehicle to drift off the roadway. And by that time, he overcorrected and the vehicle overturned. Estimated the speed is about 70, 75 miles an hour. Well, both Cody and Jodi were ejected out of the vehicle immediately. There was no chance. Dakota was also in the vehicle, but he was seatbelted in. And so, I get this information and in the process of all of this happening, I have an attorney. We're working on getting custody of Cody. There's a paternity test that's going on with Dakota because there's some questions that were raised about that. So all of this is happening, comes to a head. And so I contact my attorney and I said, "Hey, this accident happened," and he was devastated. And I said, "I need blood results because I have Dakota here who, I've paying child support on." And back then, this is 1990, you don't get blood results back as fast as you do today.
Yeah.
And so it took a couple of days and he calls back and he says, "I got the lab results. He's not your son." So not only did I lose Cody to the accident and Jodi to the accident, or Dakota to the blood test. So my whole world in about a week span just kind of exploded. And I'm still married at the time too, right? So I have a marriage going on. And so that was hard information to take, to try to understand everything that was going on at that time. Her grandmother and I did not have a good relationship. And so what had ended up happening is the grandmother ended up adopting her, and her husband adopted Dakota into it. So that was the accident. That's when that happened. And so Cody and Jodi had passed away. So fast forward to 2008. So this is 1990 moving to 2008. My father passes away and we're back home getting ready for the services. And one of the aunts reaches out to me and she says, "Hey, Dakota would like to come out and meet you. Would that be okay?" And I said, "Yeah, great. I'd love to." Keep in mind, I had not seen Dakota since 1990. So all from 1990 to 2008, had not seen Dakota. But every time I'd ran into the aunt, keep in mind, this is small town California, so people know people. Every time I run into the aunt, she says, "I don't care what the blood test says. I'm telling you that you are Dakota's dad." So Dakota comes out, we reunite. I show him the accident report. He hadn't seen that. We got to know each other and we start building a new relationship from that point on. And he starts calling me dad. I start calling him son, and all of that starts to take off well. So at that point, we've established a relationship, and we did talk about doing another paternity test. And the reason why we talked about it was there had been rumor going around, and keep in mind, this has happened in 1990, the accident and the blood test and all the stuff that was going on. There had been rumor, and I'd heard this from the aunt, that the grandmother, and I'm not making any accusations that this really happened, but this is the story that I heard. Knew somebody in the lab, the blood lab, and had the blood samples changed before they were sent off. And my understanding is at one point, the aunt had actually confronted the grandmother about that. And the grandmother had actually admitted that this had happened. But keep in mind, now he's an adult. And so we decided there's no purpose at this point in doing a paternity test. He calls me dad. I call him son. We're good with that. So we have a good relationship and we're doing good. We meet up all the time. We're laughing. We're joking. March of 2024, I'm at the same radio station I was at when Cody and Jodi passed away. And I was doing news at the radio station and we had a scanner and I heard the scanner go off. And I heard him talk about requesting EMS at this job location. And I said, man, that just sounds a lot like where Dakota is working. And it wasn't maybe 15, 20 minutes later, I get a phone call from his best friend. They'd found Dakota dead at his job site. And he wasn't even out of the vehicle. He'd passed away in the vehicle. So that obviously brings back a whole flood from the previous accident. So not only am I having to, relive Cody and Jodi's accident, I am now having to experience it all over again with my other son now passing away. I mean, my world again just exploded. I didn't think it could explode again, but it did. It exploded a second time. And all the emotions, really, to be honest, I was just wrecked at that point.
Yeah, I can understand why. I mean, in 1990, the family as you knew it was gone in a heartbeat. It just wasn't Jodi and Cody dying in a car accident. It was finding out that at that time that the paternity test ruled you out as Dakota's biological father. So you lose the family that you built, that you chose or chose you in a matter of seconds. And that in and of itself had to be devastating and hard to wrap your head around. Did you have any resentment at all towards her fiance for the accident?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Of course I did. Why did this have to happen? Why wasn't he paying attention to what was going on? Yeah, there was definitely a lot of resentment for a long time. And what's interesting, Dave, is when we started talking about doing this podcast, one of the things I've always wanted to know is the things I don't remember at that time. So what I actually did was I had actually reached out to my first ex-wife who was with me at the time of the accident. Told her, I was going to be speaking about this. And I said, I just wanted to know if you can fill in some stuff that I don't remember. And she was, grateful to say yes. I said, tell me some things about that day when Cody passed away. And she says, do you remember what you were doing? And I said, no. I said, all I remembered was the phone call. She says, you were outside, you were fighting, you were mad because you couldn't get the lawnmower started. And she goes, and for some reason, there was a reason why you couldn't get it started. And it was because I was supposed to get that phone call. When I had the accident report, up until the time that we had made this connection again to go over stuff, at the very back of the accident report, they did recommend charges against him. And I kept asking to myself, I was like, well, why didn't they? Why weren't there any charges? And she says, do you remember the phone call from the DA's office? And I said, no. She says, the DA called you and they asked you if you wanted to follow through with the charges. They put it in your hands. And I said, oh. And she says, do you remember what you told them? I said, no. She said, you told them that no, because he has to live with this the rest of his life. And that's why there was none. And so was there resentment? Yeah, there was. But here's kind of an ironic twist to all that. Dakota stayed in contact with him throughout his life. He also called him dad. I had not seen him, the guy that was driving the vehicle, until the grandmother passed away years later. That was the first time I had seen him since the funeral services. And I didn't know, to be honest with you, I didn't know how I was going to react because all of the emotions were there. Do I say anything to him? What do I do? He shows up to the service and he's now in a wheelchair because he's got some kind of a disease now that he can't. And so I didn't say anything to him that day. When Dakota passed away, of course, he was there at the service. And at that point, I did go up to him. But it wasn't to confront, because we were both, to him, that was his son. It was my son. And so we were both able to reconnect and establish not really a great bond, but just communicating, just to talk. And we were able to laugh and we were able to joke. So, had I'd gone down the road of pressing the charges, who knows what would have happened. But when I look back at it today, I'm glad I never did. I'm glad I didn't go down that road.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't either, because as it turns out, Dakota had two fathers. He had you and we had Jodi's fiance. So, and it sounds like that, the father that he lived with treated him well, and, they had a good relationship with him. So, but yeah, I think I could see the resentment building up under those circumstances, but I'm glad you took the high road.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it took time, obviously. It took time to get to that point. But yeah, like I said, I look back at it, see where he's at today. And again, it comes down to a lot too, that God directs things. That's my belief, that God directs things, and not knowing it back then, obviously in 1990, when I made the decision not to press charges, knowing where he's at today, I think God obviously knew what was coming up ahead. So.
Yeah, I mean, for me, for my own circumstance, we share the journey of child loss. My daughter, Janine, and I call it transition from the physical to the spiritual world at the age of 18 on March 1st, 2003, over 23 years ago. When you talk about timestamps, grief does create timestamps in our brain. I can remember every day, the date that's associated with her diagnosis, the day that she went to the active phase of dying, and the last day of her life. I can remember all of those, Dustin, 23 years later. I mean, the difference for me now is that 23 years later, those memories don't bring me to my knees. I just realize now that's going to be a part of what I'm going to recall. And what I recall in my life isn't always going to be pleasant, but it's something that's going to be necessary for me to embrace authenticity and to learn how to deal with everything other than happiness. So, but yeah, it's just, when you mention that about grief has timestamps, and yeah, I get that. And also where one loss can trigger memories and trigger the grief of other previous losses. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges of multiple child loss, is that I think there's those memories kind of collide, and I think the grief becomes a little bit more intense. I don't know if that's been your experience, but would you care to elaborate a little bit on the other challenges that you experience as a result of multiple child loss? And let's throw the loss of Jodi as well too in that whole mix.
Yeah, I think the moment that it really hit me, we were getting ready to walk into Dakota's services, right? And we're in the foyer of the church, the Catholic Church. And I remember, seeing everybody in there, and Dave, it just hit me, and it was just like, I said, I can't do this again. I'm sorry, I'm coming a little emotional, but it was like, I can't go through this again. I can't do this again. And I just became so overwhelmed. And it was the same church that Jodi and Cody were in. It's, and all of that, and their grandmother. And it was just like, how am I going to go through with this? I think it's for Dakota, he was well recognized within his community. He was a volunteer firefighter. He was an EMT. He worked with the coroner's office. So people knew him. It's a small town. So I think that may be added to it too, is that he was so respected in the community. But to try to deal with one is enough. Two is just like, you start asking more questions. Okay, why a second one? Why do I have to do this again? You start going, did I do something wrong? And when I step back and take a look at it from the outside, and that being, I was looking at Dakota's life, and Dakota had struggled, I think, a lot mentally, because he never got to know his mom. He never got to know his brother. He always had to live with the memories, right? He had the stories, the memories, and never really got to know it. And he struggled, alcohol was a big problem. And, alcohol was what caused his death. And he struggled so much. So when he passed away, I had to come to the realization that, in my belief, it was that God said he had suffered enough. It was time for him to be reunited with his mother and his brother, who he never got to know. And so it gave me comfort in knowing that they were reunited again, you know. And so I think for my situation, that's what helped me dealing with the 2 losses and the 3 losses, obviously with their mom, is that all of a sudden they became one again and they were happy and joyous. And so, I don't, like I said, I don't wish anybody to walk in my footsteps. I don't want anybody to go down that, but it's definitely something that will challenge you, challenges everything, your belief in everything.
And I've said on a couple of occasions, Dustin, that I wish I could have developed the same clarity, the passion for service with an event other than the passing of my daughter. But it wasn't meant to be. This was the challenge I was meant to be given in this lifetime. So we have 2 choices. We can rise to the challenge, we can transcend the challenge, or we can let the challenge overtake us, and we can choose not to engage in living. And, after a period of time of wallowing in the muck of my grief, I decided it was time, to re-engage in life, and gradually have gotten to the point now in my journey where I've accepted that this is my life going forward. My daughter's not physically going to be here, but I'm still going to re-engage in life in honor of and with her, and try to make as big of an impact as I can to the individuals that come into my path, for as long as the good Lord allows me to do it. And we don't get through this life without experiencing some type of challenge, some type of that transition that's going to test us.
Yeah, I agree. And, everybody's challenges are different, and we never compare somebody's grief with somebody else's grief, because everybody's grief or whatever they're going through is different in life. And I agree, I have this belief that the minute we're conceived, this is my belief, is that the minute we're conceived, God has laid everything out for us. He knows what's going to happen from us from start to end. He knows the happy times, the trials, the tribulations. He already knows that, right? That's already laid out for us. I think his challenge for me was I'm going to give you these challenges, not because I want to hurt you, not because I want to cause you pain, but because I want you to grow. I want you to grow in your faith and belief in me, in that I'm controlling everything, and that there is a purpose for what I allow to happen in life.
Mm.
And so when Cody and Jodi passed away, my thought was God needed 2 special angels that day. He needed them right now, and these are the 2 that he called up. And Dakota, was the same thing. It was like it was time for him to go home. So, those trials and tribulations that he lays out before us before me has definitely allowed me to grow in faith, because I've had to lean into it. I mean, yeah, I could have walked away. I could have said, "Why, God? Okay, if there was a God, then why did this even have to happen?" But I didn't take that road. I decided to take the other road and lean more into the faith and grow in my faith to have a better understanding of what it is, God has in life in store for us.
And allowing yourself to do that has allowed you to be of service to others, and to do some great things in the world. And it was because you consciously made that choice to re-engage.
Yeah, and and to be in all honesty, were there times where I didn't want to be here? Yeah, there were. I mean, that's just those 2 things are enough to say, okay, time out. Let me jump off this little round circle here. I'm done. But what does that teach the generations behind me? My kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids. What does that teach them if I just give up? It teaches them that, okay, if life gets too hard, I can just be done with it. But I want to leave a legacy behind that they can see, that says, look, Dad, Grandpa, great grandpa had to go through all of this stuff, but he kept getting up. He kept getting up again. He kept trying again. He didn't stop, despite the fact that everything he'd gone through. There's depression in there. There's the thoughts in there. I never relied on substances. Thank goodness for that. Alcohol, yeah, there was the alcohol. I did lean into alcohol, but not to a point where it controlled my life.
Yeah.
And so I just want them to know that I tried at the end of the life, that I did not give up, and that they know that they can push through it and not give up as well to make it through the end.
And modeling that behavior for your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, they're going to take that and pass that on to future generations. And your resilience is going to be passed on to other generations and other generations. And in that way, you're going to continue to go on. And if there's in families where there has been generational trauma, that type of modeling, that type of resilient behavior, other positive behaviors, that gets passed down, that redefines the narrative of the generational trauma.
Yeah. And if somebody out there is listening to this right now and you're just like, man, I just don't feel like I can go on. You're like, if you're to that point, there are resources out there that you can reach out to. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to get that help, because what you're going through right now is just maybe the lowest of valleys that you're going through. But you know what? Eventually you start to come up, and it's not an overnight journey, but it's a step-by-step journey.
Talk a little bit about some of those resources that are out there that have helped you and that can help others.
Yeah. So one of the things that I, especially once Dakota passed away, is I did seek help. I did reach out to a counselor, and that counselor's been with me ever since. I will just call up, I'll have a bad day, and he'll be there. We'll schedule like once or twice a month just to connect, to see how things are going. So obviously counseling for me. The other thing I say is, family, friends, and faith has guided me as long. I've had good family around me through all of that. I've had some very wonderful friends who have stood by my side, who've been there, who've let me cry on their shoulder, who've let me just talk to get through it, who know that there's triggers out there. They know that there's something, they'll reach out and they'll go, hey, are you doing okay? And so for me, again, it's been faith, getting into faith. I've relied on small groups in church. I've reached out to small groups, especially being a guy, being in men's small groups. It takes a while. Guys don't open up as much as easily as women do. I think that everybody knows that. But what I really realized is in those small groups, once those guards are let down, you start to find out what kind of connections you have with each other, the similarities you have through life. And it may not be the loss of a child, but similar things you're going through, whether it's divorces or finances or stuff like that. And to be able to openly talk in a setting where you're not judged by anybody, no one's pointing fingers and saying you should have done this and you should have done that. It's just an open place. So small groups, my faith, my family, and my friends have been the strongest to keep me going, my resources and my counseling.
Yeah, I think a good therapist, a good community, a good support network, whether it's through a church group, whether it's through an interfaith group, whether it's through a group that talks about spiritual practices or practice of spirituality, anything can give you that kind of support and can give you the feeling of being connected to something greater than yourself. I think is going to help us get through any type of challenge, because we can't get through it by ourselves. We're better together. And particularly during times of challenge, we're better together.
Yeah. And the other thing about that too, is when you start opening up, you do come across those individuals who have, in my circumstance, have lost the child, right? You don't know that until you start talking to them. And all of a sudden, what's neat about that is that all of a sudden you come across somebody who also lost a child. What has happened? You have an immediate connection to that person.
Yeah.
Because you're sympathetic. You understand everything they've gone through, whether it's a child that was stillborn or whether it was 30 years down the road or something like that. The loss of a child is the loss of a child.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And to be able to, all of a sudden have a unique, immediate connection to somebody else who's gone through that. There's this unique bond. It's like I said, there's this, for individuals who have lost a child, you and I, there's a unique community of people out there, right? It's not widely known, but there's a unique community of people that if you could bring them all together into a resource that could help other people, just amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I've been witness to that in my own journey in terms of the power of a good bereaved parent support group, a good community of support. That has helped me, in addition to other resources, get through what I needed to get through after the transition of my daughter, the death of my daughter. You were a contributor to a book, Miracles Are Normal. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the chapter that you contributed and in general, just what the whole anthology is about?
Again, it comes back to when we began talking with the one connection. I had no plans on writing anything or having any part of the book. Didn't plan on that. It was just happened. It was a guest that was on my show, and she reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm putting this book together called Miracles Are Normal, and I'd like to put your story in it." And I said, "Well, okay, sure, why not?" It's another adventure, right? It's another adventure in my journey. So I did it. And then basically, it's 69 stories of divine intervention and magical manifestations. So basically, the premise behind it is that miracles happen every day. They don't have to be boom miracles, but they happen every day. And so when I sat down and decided to do this, ironically, I had sat down probably a couple months earlier and started just writing out some stuff that had happened in my life. And when this happened, I said, it's one of those things where I think I started writing it for a reason. I didn't know that I was going to be asked to be included in this book with 68 other authors. So my part of it is called Miracle of the Climb. And that is basically, in a nutshell, it's just saying, hey, look, just getting up the next day or getting up today is a miracle, especially going through, like you, the loss of your daughter, and me, the loss of my son and my two sons and their mom, and just being able to get up today, being able to get up tomorrow. Those are miracles, because sometimes we beat ourselves up so much that we don't think that we can go on anymore.
Yeah.
Right? We're done. We're ready to just be done with everything. And then we wake up the next day and you go, wow, that's a miracle. God gave me another day. Right? What a miracle God has given me to get up another day. And I look at that as he hasn't finished his purpose with me yet.
Yep.
He's got something for me to do. He's not done with my story yet. And there's something else that I'm supposed to do. And that comes back to serving. You were talking a lot about that, about serving other people.
Yep.
And so that's what I believe that, now my purpose is to serve other people using my voice that's what God gave me to use. God said, here's a voice. I don't want you to be silent. I want you to use it, but I want you to use it to serve other people.
Yeah. After Janine died, I prayed to God. I said, look, if you want eternity to start now, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with going now. And 23 years later, he hasn't answered me. So, and in looking back, I'm grateful that he didn't answer me, because my intention or my prayer or my testimony, however you want to look at that, was that I just couldn't deal with the pain of not having my daughter here. And I wanted to be where she was. I was never suicidal, but I said, look, if my clock's up now, if you want to call in my chips, fine, I'm good with that. But he never answered. And like you said, I think he had a greater purpose for both of us. And when every day we wake up, that tells us we're not done yet. It tells us that we have more work to do. And now I pray to God and just say, look, you've given me all the stuff to do. Give me enough time to finish it, and then you can do it. You can have me. So, and that was a shift in my perspective, because over 23 years ago when Janine died, I would never have thought that way, but now I do. Eternity can wait. I'm not afraid of death, but I'm not ready to go yet, because I think I still have more to offer. And as long as I wake up every day, the good Lord's in agreement with me.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not afraid either, because I know what's going to happen when I pass away. When I go, I get to be reunited with them. And so I'm not afraid of that, but I do have a purpose still. I'm not ready. As we were talking about before, John, who was the guy who taught me in radio, he had this funny saying, right? He said, you never know when the good Lord's going to call you a ping pong ball up the chute. So you might as well live the best of your life today.
That's right.
Right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And certainly, what you've done in the aftermath of tragedy is that you are living your best life every day. So for those of you who are going to be watching this on YouTube, you have a marvelous background. It's for your podcast, Eagle Freedom Presents Rise, Inspire, and Overcome. and you have in the background just a majestic eagle flying over the mountains. I could sit there and stare at this and not say a word to you.
Yeah, move my head so you can, for those
Yeah,
on
well,
YouTube, they
yeah.
can see that.
Yeah, that is just gorgeous. So tell us about your podcast, Eagle Freedom Presents, and what can Eagle teach us about resilience in life in general?
Yeah, so the podcast, I actually came up with the idea like 7 or 8 years ago. And I mean, I recall where I was standing. I said, well, that just sounds like something that would be interesting to do. But it's one of those ideas that you get and it's like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And you just put it on the shelf and that's where it stays. And about a year ago, actually, yeah, just about a year ago is when I asked myself a question. I said, do you want to do this or not? It's there. I was in a position where I didn't have a whole lot going on. I was in between work and stuff. And it's like, you've got time to do this if you want to do this. So I decided at that point that I'm going to start working on it. And that was in June of 2025 when I started working on it. And it didn't launch until September. So obviously it took months to, as you know, putting together the podcast and stuff like that. But when I was sitting down to figure out, okay, but what do I want to do? Through radio, one of the things I really enjoyed was talking to people. I enjoyed interviewing people. I like getting to hear the stories. But I started saying, what I want to do is I don't want just the surface level stuff. I want the stuff underneath here. What made that person who they are?
Yep.
And so I just, eagle freedom. So to me, you were talking about what does the eagle teach us, right? Well, I have a Native American background, and whether it's Native American or the United States or wherever you are, the eagle just seems to be that it's that majestic bird. I think that God gave us this eagle, this massive, beautiful thing. And an eagle doesn't come down to confrontation. It doesn't try to start a fight. It doesn't do any of that. An eagle's greatest foe is a crow, right? A crow will just keep picking at it. And the eagle doesn't pick back. He just says, look, okay, if this is what you really want to do, I'm going to go up, I'm going to rise a little bit higher up, right? So the crow will go up a little bit higher and it goes higher until the point where the crow can no longer compete with the eagle because of the altitude and it just drops on down. So what does the eagle do? Its resilience is built in rising above the circumstance, right? Rise, inspire, and overcome. So that's where I really started getting this, developing the rise, inspire, and overcome, the Rio movement. It rises above everything. And so that's where the eagle comes into play. And what he teaches us is that you don't have to fight all the time. You don't have to be in a battle all the time. Simply just move yourself to a higher level, a higher frequency, and everything else that's going to bug you is going to eventually fall down away. And that's, I think, to me, is what the eagle teaches us when it comes down to resilience.
Yeah, I like that. And when you rise to a higher frequency, you're also looking at things through divine sight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you see an eagle, what does he do? He just sits up on a perch and he just looks. He doesn't go causing any problems. He just kind of observes, and that's what he does.
You mentioned crows. Crows are fearless. I mean, they'll attack birds in their territory that are bigger than them, hawks or whatever. And one of the things I always thought about crow is that it could teach us to overcome our fears because they're fearless. If any bird comes in their territory, they're gonna protect it. And I mean, I think every animal, every bird, every rock, every tree has got a spirit, has got something to teach us if we allow it to, if we believe that our interconnectedness goes beyond humanity, it goes beyond everything that's a part of nature.
Right. I agree. Yeah, it definitely. I think that goes with, like you said, with everything. Even life experiences teaches us, teaches us something that we can learn from. Just like everything that you've had to go through and everything I've got to go through. We've been taught along the way, we've been taught things and how to handle situations, how to overcome them, how to deal with the situation, and it's like, could I gone that substance and really alcohol really bad and all that? Like, yeah, I could have gone down that road, but I chose not to. I wanted to go this way over here, right? So.
Yeah, with consequential thinking, I always used to tell my clients, because I worked in addictions for 22 years. I told them, I said, look, there are consequences to any choice that you make. You could take the road to sobriety. You could take the road to continued relapse and addiction. There are consequences. Be aware of the consequences before you choose that road, And whatever road you choose, be willing to be accountable for those consequences, either good or bad. And we have free will. We can choose whatever road we want to go down in. And it's just whatever we feel is going to be best or the road that we need to take at that time.
Yeah, and the good thing about that is you can pivot at any time.
Yep.
Right? You can pivot at any time. You may go down this road, you think it's the right road. Oh, that's not the right road. All right. Well, I can pivot. Now I can change over here.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk, if I can talk about real quick is, when you're talking about resources, is that's the circle of friends that you have around you. I think we've talked about this, how important that circle of influence is around you. So if I was in a circle of influence at the time of my son's and their mom's passing, if I was in a circle that did rely on substance or just, whatever like that, if that was my core circle, what would I have done? I would have gravitated because that's what they knew. But if you choose that circle carefully and place those special people in that really close circle, you can really navigate through those hard times with those associations that you make, right? So be very careful about the associations you make in life, especially when it comes down to the trials and the tribulations that you have to go through, right? Because who are going to be your core people? Are they going to be the core people over here that are going down this road that's not so good? Or are they going to be those core people that are strong? They're there to help. They're help to build. They're there to be honest with you when you're, hey, come on, snap out of it type of situation. So choose that circle carefully.
When we are going through our own challenges, we need to have people that are going to challenge us with different perspectives that we're going to need to consider if we're going to move through that phase of our lives. And we're going to address the challenges and rise, inspire, and overcome, which I think has probably become your mantra.
Yeah, it is. It has become my mantra. And if you think about it, those words, every one of those words is an action word. You have to do something, right? Rise, you have to inspire, you have to overcome. Those are all action words. You got to do something, right? And so, yeah, it has become my mantra. It's, become something that's meaningful to me. One of the things I do is I do rideshare, and I get all kinds of people in the vehicle with me. And it's such a great thing. You meet so many walks of life, right? And so many conversations end up having to do with life in general. People come in, they're happy, they're doing great. You got people in there who are just miserable, people that are struggling, and you don't know, a simple conversation can simply change the direction of somebody's day.
Yeah. Simple conversation, a simple smile, just a simple acknowledgement, because people want to be seen. And many times they don't feel that they're seen for a variety of different reasons.
Right. I agree. Definitely.
Deston, you've left us with a lot of good stuff today, a lot of good takeaways, but I want to ask you if you could leave our listeners with one thing that you want them to remember from our conversation today, what would that be?
For those that are struggling, I would say, look, it's okay to be struggling. It is okay. And it's okay to acknowledge that you're struggling too, right? You don't always have to put on the facade that everything is great, So just know that it's okay.
Yep.
And that there are people out there that are ready and willing to help for those that are struggling. For those that know somebody who's struggling, who's going through a lot, take the time, not just in the passing of, hi, how are you doing? But really reach out and go, you know what? How are you really doing?
Yep.
Take some time to spend with them, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 50, go to coffee, whatever. Take some time out and say, look, I'm blocking some time out. I just want to spend some time with you and see how you're doing.
Yeah. And if you ask somebody like yourself or me who has gone through challenge, how we're doing today, be prepared to stay for a while, because it just isn't just, just a approved salutation or a greeting to start a conversation. When you say that to somebody who's gone through challenge, it has a variety of different implications. So be prepared. If you're going to ask that question, be prepared to stick around and be witness and be a companion and let that person talk.
Most definitely, yeah.
Deston, my last question for you. If people want to contact you, find out more about the anthology book, Miracles Are Normal, and follow your podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
So the easiest way, egofreedompresents.com. It's got everything. It's got all the links in there. You can also get a link to the book is in there. So that's going to be the easiest way to reach out and find out more about that. If you want to reach out to me, if you've got a story, you think you've got something that, wants to be heard. Not everybody has a story that wants to be told. That's fine. But if you think you know somebody or you have a story, just send an email to egofreedompresents@gmail.com. Send me the information and then we'll connect. And if it's a good connection, we'll go from there. But that's the easiest way. And you can find me on all the streaming platforms, YouTube, everything else. So.
And I will make sure all of your contact information gets into the episode notes before we go live on YouTube and my other podcast channels. So Deston, thank you so much for just a great conversation today. I truly enjoyed it, and I hope we can do it again in the future sometime.
Well, Dave, I thank you for the opportunity, and I'm glad again going back that Anastasia connected us. I now have a new friend in life and a new friend in life journey, and I want to thank you for allowing me to come on to your podcast and sharing my story with your audience.
It's my pleasure. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.